Another week, boys, and another Wednesday TWAB. Season 20 weapon tuning preview. So this is actually from Chris Proctor here, guys, and a lot of changes in this one. Good day, Guardians. We're back with another weapons preview. In the Season 19 mid-season balance update, we brought in several changes to address weapons and PvP. In Season 20, with a new campaign and raid incoming, we focus on a substantial pass over heavy weapons for PvE, adding subclass VERBS to several exotic weapons, tying in with the new anti-champion capabilities these VERBS now have. Now, between the new weapon changes and everything else that's new or changing in Lightfall, we're looking forward to seeing what combinations players settle on for the legendary campaign in the Day 1 raid. By the way, guys, if you missed our previous Wednesday TWABs, I guess as we're calling it, we're actually calling it this Wednesday at Bungie, there's an entire breakdown of what subclass VERBs are going to work against certain champions. Things like Suppression, Jolt, Scorch, and Ignitions. And overall, like a ton of different changes that are going to be affecting how you deal with champions next season, and of course, artifact mods themselves. Now moving on, weapon archetypes. When playing on console, your reticle will turn red when it's over an enemy that's inside your weapon effective range. This is a useful visual aid that we wanted to be global for a while, so we've also enabled this on PC. In a future season, we'll be making this color customizable, similar to the base reticle color. Red reticle is now enabled on PC. Crazy enough, my reticle is actually set to red already. Now, linear fusion rifles. You probably saw this coming. Linear fusion rifles outperform other heavy weapons for boss damage by a wide margin and have had plenty of time in the sun. We're bringing them down enough for other options to compete. At the same time, exotic heavy linear fusion rifles don't do enough to justify using one over a legendary, so they're not affected by this nerf. So number one, reduce damage versus champions, mini bosses, and vehicles by 15%. However, Sleeper Simulant and Queen Breaker's Bow are unaffected. Sleeper fans, this is not a drill. All right, Sleeper's back on the table, man, as it should be. Now, guys, we saw this coming. We knew this was gonna happen. We've been talking about the linear fusion rifle nerf coming. This is it. Those tape pans, those storm chasers, that fire and forget that you just got this past season. Love them, keep them, hold them. They'll probably get buffed again at some point in the future, but they are going to be dealing 15% less damage next season. Now, machine guns. Machine guns have been buffed a few times over the past year or so, but only in PvE. We've opted to increase their base damage a little, which makes them more forgiving to use in PvP. The buff also applies across the board in PvE. PvP damage is typically the base, and PvE has multipliers on top of that. We're also substantially increasing machine gun reserves, giving them higher uptime, particularly useful in hard content. So we're increasing the damage by 10% with the following effects on time to kill against Guardians with tier 6 resilience, and that being high impacts, TTK reduction being reduced from 0.67 seconds to 0.5. Oh wow, we're getting down to like Destiny 1 territory here. Rapid fire frames from 0.53 to 0.47. Adaptives unchanged at 0.53. They also increase reserve ammo by 50% at 0 inventory stat and 20% at 100 inventory stat. Note, inventory stat is a 0 to 100 value behind the scenes. This is presented as the actual number of rounds in game, but you could take this to mean that low reserve machine guns get a big boost, while large reserves machine guns get a smaller boost. Now keep in mind, guys, this 10% buff, which is going to be for PvE and for PvP, may not sound that good for those retrofits out there that just got nerfed because it doesn't synergize as well with what Gerfalcon used to do. We had an entire breakdown of Volatile and how it was nerfed as well, but the machine gun you need to be thinking of, the machine gun you absolutely need to have now more than ever, is Grand Overture. We've done damage tests on this. Grand Overture puts out. That volley damage is nuts. And if this 10% applies to it as well, you may be using this machine gun throughout Lightfall's legendary campaign and the raid. Now, heavy grenade launchers. Heavy grenade launchers haven't been touched in a while and are substantially below some other heavy options for damage. On top of that, grenade launcher projectiles have travel time, ballistic arc, and a relatively small blast radius. So it can be hard to consistently land shots on a moving target, and they may hit fewer targets with the explosion than you would expect. With this change, heavy grenade launchers should be significantly more useful in PvE and easier to use in PvE and inside of PvP. So we increase the damage versus champions, mini bosses, and vehicles by 20%, miners by 40%. Also improve projectile collision, making it slightly easier to land hits. Also increase blast radius by 1 meter. Parasite is unaffected as it does huge damage already. Guys, it doesn't matter. You better break out those grenade launchers. Prospector just got chain reaction as well. You also have a number of other legendary options out there that are really good. If y'all remember, like way back when, Swarm of the Raven was like the meta, but you have like the craftable Tarnation. Hell, you even have Crime Mutiny. So again, look through your vault, see what heavy grenade launchers you have. With this ginormous buff coming to its damage, you definitely want to be keeping some GLs going into next season. And on top of that, notice they said it doesn't apply to Parasite, but nothing about Anarchy, which means the nerf that Anarchy got a long time ago, it had already received some buffs, but now that it's getting this 20% buff against bosses and mini bosses and champions and a 40% buff against weapons. Miners, outside of ammo economy, anarchy is back, fellas. Now shotguns. The new shotgun reticles show the correct spread pattern, but in its shipping form, the size of the reticle wasn't affected by the current spread angle, which will change if you jump, or with magazine options like smoothbore. Oh, thank God, this is finally being addressed. This change should make the reticle accurate in most ways at 85 degrees field of view. A change to make this accurate for all field of view options will come in a future season. Interesting. Why 85? Is that like the default for consoles? Starting with point 1 though, shotgun reticles now change in size proportional to spread angle. Related notes, the Legend of Accura's hipfire reticle is now a bit more representative of its very large spread angle. All right, hopefully this actually gets adjusted because I play on 105 field of view. I don't know what you guys play at. I want to say most consoles though, don't they go over 100 plus now? Like the new gen consoles? Now kinetic weapons. Kinetic slot weapons have always done 5% more damage versus unshielded targets in PvE. This meant that kinetic slot stasis weapons were straight up better with extra functionality and no downside. We want to give players more of a reason to run kinetic damage type weapons. So instead of a blanket kinetic slot damage boost, we're switching to a kinetic damage type boost based on whether your kinetic weapons uses primary or special ammo and increase the bonus significantly. So kinetic primary weapon damage multiplier increased from 1.05 to now 1.1. And kinetic special weapon damage, its multiplier has been increased from a whopping 1.05 to 1.15. Holy hell! Kinetic slot stasis weapons no longer have the 5% damage bonus versus unshielded targets in PvE. There's also a kinetic damage type perk coming in Lightfall. So Bungie is leaning into kinetic here. Fellas, if you don't have that craftable succession or even heritage, now is the time to get it. But across the board, this is a massive buff. More so than that is the kinetic special weapon damage. I mean, that 1.05 to 1.15, that is huge. Granted, I know it kind of gets undermined in certain burn activities, but dude, my Witherhoard's gonna be doing more damage? Hell yeah! Now exotics. Now, just like many players, we've wanted exotic weapons that have strong theming around their damage type to use the real subclass 3.0 VERBS. And Lightfall's longer development and playtest cycle gave us the opportunity to add subclass VERBS to many of the top picks. Our goal with adding subclass 3.0 VERBS is to grant these weapons additional functionality and let them tie into subclass builds in a more meaningful way. In most cases, this also or is paired with a hefty buff. So first on the list, the Queenbreaker's blinding effect was underwhelming for a heavy weapon, so we've changed how that's deployed. Note that the Queenbreaker was also not affected by the global damage reduction to linear fusion rifles, making it substantially stronger by comparison. Shots now chain to nearby enemies and uses Arc 3.0 blind. Interesting. Too bad it didn't get like the Darcy approach, right? Like Queenbreaker's bow with jolt. Oh, now Ruinous Effigy feels very voidy, and slamming the Transmutation Sphere was an obvious place to put an additional effect. So Transmutation Spheres and their slam attack now suppresses. Again, this is a big deal, guys, because suppression next season will literally counter champions. And of course, tie into Void 3.0. You can suppress overload champions. So you can imagine like Ruinous Effigy, you get a kill, you drop that Void Orb, you go in, do the slam, suppress the overload champion, plus it does a tremendous amount of damage. This is a very good change here, Bungie. Now, the Leviathan's Breath buff from a few seasons back inadvertently reduced the PvP damage enough that it can no longer one-hit kill players in their super with a headshot. We fixed that, but also added Volatile and increased the damage versus champions substantially to highlight its anti-champion role. So now it will apply Volatile on perfect draw impact. It will also increase the damage from 396 to 442. This allows us to once again one-hit kill all supers in PvP and increase damage versus champions by 30%. Dude, that's nuts. That is absolutely nuts. We have talked so much trash about Leviathan's Breath, but it's now about to be so damn good. Now, 1000 Voices was briefly a top pick in season 14, but has been eclipsed by other options since then. We wanted to lean even more into the chain of solar explosions by adding Scorch, and with global heavy weapon changes, it's also a strong option. If you have Ember of Ashes equipped, landing a full burst on a single target will trigger an ignition immediately. Exact results may vary depending on whether other players are also scorching a target. Guys, can you imagine an entire team of 1000 Voices all blowing their load and subsequently ignitions happening constantly? This is a fantastic change, and depending on this change, 1000 Voices may actually become meta here. Also states right here, each explosion now applies 10 plus 15 with Ember of Ashes Scorch stacks. So again, with Ember of Ashes, you will get that ignition. By the way, 1000 Voices is not a linear fusion rifle. It is a fusion rifle, therefore avoiding the nerf that other linear fusion rifles are getting. Now, Sunshot was a top candidate for applying solar subclass VERBS, and explosions are the clear place to add to. So explosion on kill now applies 10 plus 5 Scorch stacks. So I'm assuming the plus 5 is with Ember of Ashes. Keep in mind, the thing about Sunshot, it has multiple explosions. So if it's actually chaining, if Scorch is actually being being applied, it's dealing that damage. And that could be just enough damage to spark another explosion and another explosion. So yes, it's possible you can get an ignition out of this. Now, Polaris Lance always had a burn effect, so it was an obvious change to switch this to Scorch. So the perfect 5th shot now applies 40 plus 20 Scorch stacks instead of a custom burn. Dude, we just did an entire primary weapon breakdown video of like the best damage dealers. If Polaris Lance is able to actually stack on ignitions, there you go. Instead of pulling out that Outbreak Perfected during the day 1 raid when you get damage checked, you may be pulling out that Polaris Lance. Again, you could just sit there and just land crits over and over, sparking ignitions. Now, Two-Tailed Fox had enough competition as a heavy exotic weapon, but now it's the only weapon that can apply subclass VERBS from multiple damage types without extra steps. So the Solar Rocket will now apply 60 plus 30 Scorch stacks instead of burn. And the Void Rocket also suppresses, and the Catalyst completes the trifecta. Wait, what? Incoming Joe Catalyst? Prometheus Lens has utility with its Solo 3.0 rework, but we wanted to give it something more spectacular on kills in addition. So we added the Incandescent perk to the Catalyst. Dude, Bungie is going nuts right now. What the hell? Grand Overture's latest buff, increasing the missile's damage by 50%, brought it up plenty. It just needed its blind update to tie into Arc 3.0. So we switched the Catalyst to use Arc Blind. Oh, thank God. I thought they were about to say we're nerfing Grand Overture. Now Hipfire Reticles. We're starting to experiment with Hipfire Weapon Reticles, conveying more information, and use the Mana Core as a test bed for this. You can expect to see more weapon types or exotic weapon functionality showing up in Hipfire Reticles in Season 21 and beyond. They added a reticle element to the Manticore, showing current stacks of anti-grav repulsor. All right, so something there to just kind of display more information. I don't think this is really going to change anything for Manticore itself. What I'm curious about, though, is what we can expect for other weapons that really rely on Hipfire. Like, how is Last Word going to change with these Hipfire reticle changes? Or even Dead Man's Tale. And I know it just got a nerf, but I am curious about that. Now, perks. With Strand coming to the game, along with a new Strand weapon damage perk, we've updated a couple of older perks. Osmosis now works with Strand. Element of Capacitor now has the following effect when using a Strand subclass. Plus 20 airborne effectiveness, plus 25 for the enhanced perk. All right. Again, guys, AE is still going to be something that you want to build into. You just reach better in-air accuracy faster than what you did before. And considering that Strand is going to be all about us in air, or at least ziplining around, this makes sense. Now, Rewind Rounds will be appearing on more weapons in Lightfall, but was custom built to only work with the Vaulted Glass weapon set. We tweaked it to be more general purpose, so rebuilt to work on non-Vaulted Glass weapons. Eager's Edge had some bugs that needed addressing in a previous release. We've now taken the time to do a more complete rework, which also let us reduce or remove most of the restrictions that were in place. So no longer deactivates when moving faster than 35 meters per second, deactivates correctly after a single melee swing, reduce the base lunge distance buff from 2 to now 1.8, reduce airborne lunge distance penalty from 25% to 20%, and the enhanced perk now increases lunge distance slightly back up to 2. Personally, I don't really use Eager's Edge. I know there's a lot of speedrunners that definitely rely on these swords to boost with, and it's my understanding that you're still able to boost with those swords. Now, blinding grenades on grenade launchers don't do arc damage, so it's not appropriate for them to trigger Arc 3.0 blind effects. We didn't feel the need to change their disorienting effect though, so we've updated the name to Overlap Less. So renaming blinding grenades to disorienting grenades. Now, guys, the reason why this is a big deal is because Unstoppable Champions next season, you could actually stun an Unstoppable Champion by blinding them. Question that we had, could you do it with a blinding grenade launcher? And the answer to that is no. Bungie's just literally changing this to disorienting grenades, meaning you need to lean into Arc 3.0 to get that blind off. Now, Vice Stinger. Vice Stinger is one of the most desirable origin traits in the game, particularly, but not only, on linear fusion rifles, to the point where it makes it hard for non-Vice weapons to compete. It needed some adjustment. With this change, it's still valuable, but more in line with other origin traits. Now, this was typically a full reload when the perk activated. It now reloads 25% of the magazine. All right, Vice, not only are linear fusion rifles getting nailed, but the Vice origin trait itself is getting hurt. Now, keep in mind, guys, if you have the new Fire and Forget linear fusion, it does have Vice Stinger, but because it's an aggressive frame and shoots that 3-round burst, it pretty much constantly procs Vice Stinger. So I think there is going to be a way around this. They don't mention anything about that archetype of linears with Vice Stinger. You just won't get the freebies like you did with things like Tapan or even like Reed's Regret, etc. Now the future. We're already hard at work on seasons 21 and 22. And some of the changes we're making include adding a full auto melee accessibility setting, which will apply to all forms of melee. A pass over weapon types and exotic weapon hipfire reticles, including increasing how visible they change, even at high field of view, and adding features like charge meters and exotic perk counters. We've also got balance changes in the works, but it's a little too early to get into them. We'll have more information to share post-life. Lightfall. Dude, that full auto melee setting is gonna be nuts. Can you imagine like Syntheseps just running around full auto melee? It's gonna be hell trying to keep up with that. Overall, guys, everything that I've seen here, honestly, nothing but good stuff. Everything here looks excellent. I know there's gonna be some people bummed out about linear fusion rifles, but this is something Bungie's been telling us about for like literally the past 6 months. I'm ready for the meta shift. I'm ready to try out grenade launchers again. Anarchy is definitely back on the table. Grand Overture is looking absolutely sexy, as is, and is only gonna get better in the next sandbox. And all the different changes there with our subclass 3.0 verbs tying into these different exotics. This is the power fantasy that I have been wanting ever since we first saw 3.0 subclasses. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.